U.S. investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, he's revealed Biden's possible involvement in the attacks on Russia's Nord Stream gas pipelines. Reportedly, the attacks were planned for 9 months since 2021. Let's learn more about the story right now with RT's Marina Kozareva joining us here live in the studio. Just quickly, Marina, it's worth reminding our guests that Seymour Hersh is a legendary journalist. He's known for pushing back on the mainstream narratives. Just quickly, one example is in general, he has huge contempt for the American media. But when it comes to the official U.S. government narrative on the death of Osama bin Laden, Seymour Hersh called it one big lie. He's always pushing back on what are the mainstream narratives. Now we have this intriguing and disturbing revelation coming from Seymour Hersh about the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. What do you know?
Yes, absolutely. And it seems he has a lot of trust, which is why we are seeing that he says that it's a source that he's quoting with direct knowledge of the operational planning. And he goes into this very, very detailed explanation of how it was done, for how the U.S. blew up the pipelines. And how it happened is, according to Seymour Hersh, is that they used the U.S.'s Navy's Diving and Salvage Center. And the reason why they did that is because this way they didn't have to be held accountable to, because they weren't America's Special Forces Command, they weren't accountable to the Senate, and they didn't have to report to Congress. So they could do it hushed up. And they had a lot of secret meetings that went back and forth, according to Seymour Hersh. And he is quoting a source with direct knowledge of the operation that went on there. He's not revealing any names or who the source is. But the amount of detail that is in this clearly shows that this person knows what he's talking about. So how did they do this? This is something, actually, Rory, that we were reporting about, and we were called that this is disinformation. So when we were saying that in June, the U.S. was boasting, back in June before this all happened, the U.S. was boasting itself on the website saying how it had underwater divers performing exercises, testing their new drones. This is actually when they were planting the mines that then they went on to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines. So this was an operation called Baltops, and because it was from the area that this happened. So the way it was is that there was a lot of back and forth how to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines. And apparently top U.S. officials were discussing this. They were saying, how do we do this? Because they wanted to make sure that Russian dominance, when it comes to Germany and its energy sector, that was taken away. So that is the reason why they wanted Nord Stream blown up. They wanted it destroyed. They saw it as a way that Vladimir Putin's coffers were getting more and more money because Gazprom was making money. They're saying that because it's a state company, then the profits went on to Vladimir Putin. They wanted to make sure that Russia was getting no profit from any energy sales. They wanted to make sure that Germany doesn't feel that it can stand up to Russia if it wanted to because it's getting gas. So they wanted to eliminate all of that. But how do they do it? They can't just go out there and blow up the pipelines.
How did they do it, Marie?
They used this U.S.'s Navy's Diving and Salvage Center because it's the Navy. It's not part of the armed forces, so they don't have to report to Congress. So they can do it all hushed up. So according to them, last June, these Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise, which is what we were reporting about when the Nord Stream terrorist attack, I should say, happened. We were saying that, hold on a second, we found this article where they're openly discussing how they had underwater divers in that same area where the explosions happened. And apparently now we know, according to Seymour Hersh and his source that revealed detailed explanation of how this was prepared and planned, this is exactly what they used, that so-called NATO exercise. That was used to plant. And the reason why they used that salvage center and not their undercover agents was because they didn't have to talk to Congress about it. They didn't have to get their approval.
I get that. So, I mean, just basically, let's remind our viewers, I mean, this guy, Seymour Hersh, he's a former New York Times writer. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He said that when it comes to the death of Osama bin Laden, he said the U.S. government narrative was BS. He said it was one big lie. Now he's come out with what is breaking news here on RT, saying that American divers, under the cover of NATO exercises last summer, planted explosives on the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, which were then blown up by Norwegians. Now, Marina, we know that Russia was blocked from any investigation into the sabotage of the pipelines. Of course, the Western press at first said Russia has bombed its own pipelines. Another dose of BS from the empire of lies, right?
Yeah, well, at first it was Russia blow up its own pipelines. Actually, not at first. At first, which is something I wanted to get into later, but let's talk about this now. At first, we had officials, some European officials saying, "Thank you, USA." Remember that?
That's right.
And that was a top Polish MEP that was saying that. We'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Let's have a listen to actual Seymour Hersh, a little excerpt from the article where he exposes all of this. Let's have a listen.
The Norwegians had a solution to the crucial question of when the operation should take place. Every June for the past 21 years, the American Sixth Fleet, whose flagship is based in Gaeta, Italy, south of Rome, has sponsored a major NATO exercise in the Baltic Sea involving scores of Allied ships throughout the region. The current exercise, held in June, would be known as Baltic Operations 22. The Norwegians proposed this would be the ideal cover to plant the mines.
So the planning of this started in December of 2021 when they all met up and started discussing, okay, how do we fight Vladimir Putin? And they decided that they were going to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines once again to make sure that there's no reliance on Russia, so that Germany could feel like it can stand up to it and doesn't feel pressured, right? So not to go in and, for example, be an ally of the United States. So this way, if they took out Nord Stream, that reliance on gas goes away because there are no pipelines. And also, Vladimir Putin is not making money. So this is exactly what they were trying to do, weaken Russia, right? So, and then recently we've heard, not only after the Nord Stream attack happened, did we have European officials saying, thank you, USA. We also had Victoria Nuland, for example, right? She was discussing this, and let's have a listen, actually, to what Victoria Nuland had to say.
I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
And actually, it's interesting here because we also heard, let's not forget, Joe Biden himself said, well, if Russia does anything in Ukraine, we will just make sure that Nord Stream doesn't exist. And everyone was saying at the time, well, how would you do that? This is actually it's not on Russian territory. And he said, well, we will find a way to do that. And apparently, according to Seymour Hersh, after they came out and said that, they went behind the scenes and said, hold on a second, guys, what are you doing? This is supposed to be, we're keeping this hush-hush. We're planning this. And then we had Victoria Nuland saying this. And then
Blinken as well. Secretary of State Blinken, wasn't he saying this is a tremendous opportunity? He said that in the wake of the terrorist attacks on the pipe.
Exactly. And all these people, apparently, according to Seymour Hersh, they were planning this all along for months before, 9 months. There were a lot of back and forth, secret meetings. Even with Norway, they were discussing this with Norway. How can we get it done? Oh, let's use the NATO exercise we have in June. And we were talking about this on this channel after the Nord Stream terrorist attack, and they were saying that this is disinformation, that we're just using an innocent NATO exercise that they were doing, testing drones, when apparently this is what they were using.
It's always innocent, Marina. Otherwise, it's always about humanitarian needs and democracy. I mean, it's so difficult to get through the CAC, but eventually you do tend to get there. Seymour Hersh, legendary journalist, blowing the lid off who was really behind the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yes, and I'll work on more details, and next hour I will bring you word for word exactly how they did it.
I'm looking forward to it, Marina. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.